And welcome to another edition of Montreal Hockey Now podcast. Your host, Jimmy Murphy, here with my co host, Marco D'Amico, and a return guest. I believe, Marco, was he on? No, he wasn't. He was on the Bruins one, I think, with me. So his first time here on the Montreal Hockey Now podcast, and that is longtime NHL TV analyst, NHL coach, NHL executive, and who knows what he's going to do next. But Pierre McGuire is joining us now. Pierre, how's it going?
Very well, Jimmy. How you doing?
I'm doing great, doing great. Under 3 weeks to the draft, getting pretty excited to get up to Montreal for draft week and see my friend Marco here up there and just taking all the excitement. Of course, anytime Montreal hosts something, Pierre, as you know, it's an event. They do it right. They know how to do it. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, the draft is the second most important date on the NHL calendar. The first most important date is the day the Stanley Cup is awarded. The draft is the second most important calendar on the NHL, or the most important date on the NHL calendar. I've been a draftnik since I was a little kid. I remember when Montreal drafted Guy Lafleur and how that just stimulated the entire city. I'll never forget the '79 draft, and you look at that, and then I'll never forget my first NHL draft working was 1990, and with the fifth pick overall, the Pittsburgh Penguins took Jaromir Jagr. I was part of that, and I'll never forget all the drafts I did with Bob McKenzie and Gord Miller at TSN, the best draft of all time, the 2003 draft. So, which still has players playing in it. In fact, the 205th player picked in that draft, Marco and Jimmy, Joe Pavelski, is still ripping it up. He went 205th in that draft.
Yep.
So, draft is awesome. I'm a draftnik. I love it. And I'm looking forward to getting to Montreal as well.
I'll get you in a second, Marco, but you touched on something there. It's just kind of when they took Guy Lafleur and just the way it resonates through that city and the excitement it can create. Well, obviously, there's a lot of excitement right now building up to this draft for the Montreal Canadiens, not just because they're hosting it, but obviously because they have the number one pick overall. And as an organization, Pierre, like you said, you've been involved with this before with Pittsburgh. How important is it for them to get that right and to just sort of set the tone for a new era in Canadians hockey?
Well, you always want to try to get the draft right, especially when you're picking in the top 10. I mean, for Montreal, it's really important. They've got new management people in there. And obviously you look at the different scenarios. They've obviously started to clean house, moving Shea Weber out, bringing in Dadonov from Vegas. So, they're starting to move bodies. You would think that they want to stockpile more and more young assets because of the direction that they're going. And I would say that Jeff Gorton proved that his formula works. He did a heck of a job with the New York Rangers. And you look at how the Rangers played this year, and that was all under the vision of Jeff Gorton. So I would say that, he and Kent Hughes have a real strong plan. They're very unified, and they'll probably do some really good things. But the draft is really important for Montreal and all the teams that are picking in the top 10.
Marco?
Yeah, well, I mean, anybody that has to draft in the top 10, I think, especially with what happened with the Canadiens and Jesperi Kotkaniemi, and then the way that they gave up pretty quickly on Mikhail Sergachev. Like, when you're picking top 10, you have to make sure you're getting it right, because it could be detrimental to the team. And in this day and age, with the way the salary cap works and the requirement to have these kind of top 10 picks provide value for you under their entry-level contracts, especially in a flat cap era for now, is invaluable. So you have to get it right. And then obviously this is Montreal's first overall pick, since 1981, if I'm not mistaken, or 1980. So 42 years now.
And who did they draft then? You guys know?
Doug Wickenheiser.
There you go.
Doug Wickenheiser.
Yep. I was 10 years not alive yet, but I knew that. It's definitely an interesting time. I mean, we're talking about the first overall pick a lot, but this is also the first draft in 20 years that Montreal has multiple first round picks as well. So that's an interesting aspect that has a lot of people talking. The potential of actually being able to move up is also a difference maker in the conversations. And we just spoke about Jeff Gorton, right? Jeff Gorton has a track record of being aggressive at the draft table. We were talking about how well he built up the New York Rangers. Well, Keandre Miller and Braden Schneider were players that he traded up for and was aggressive about getting, and it's paying dividends. So a lot of people are looking at the Rangers and hoping that the same kind of success at the draft table can happen for the Montreal Canadiens.
Yeah, there's one caveat to everything Marco said, and I thought that was really well said and very eloquent. And Jimmy, you've made some really good points. I just have to caution everybody because I think it's important to be fair about this, especially to the young players. The 99 draft is probably the worst draft that the National Hockey League has had since the draft started. And I'm not saying that this draft will be similar, but this draft is not overly deep. And just to be fair to the players and to the teams, I know there's a lot of pomp and circumstance and hype, but I spent a lot of time out on the road this year. I watched a significant amount of tape. I've been in touch with a lot of my scouting friends and the people that I used to work with. And I would just tell you that as excited as everybody is about the new draft coming up and everybody getting together for the first time in a while, which I think is really significant, you just got to be careful that you don't overhype this draft because it's not particularly overwhelmingly strong.
Yeah, to follow on that, Pierre, a lot of chatter right now about Montreal actually trying to acquire the second overall pick from New Jersey and be able to pick 1-2 to start the draft at the Bell Center, and what a splash that would be. But at the same time, kind of connected to what you're just saying right now, how careful, I guess, and I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I don't imagine that Jeff Molson is the type of guy that's going to sort of push or nudge a little too much to make a move like that. But how careful does the organization have to be to balance wanting to make that splash, but at the same time maintaining their plan going forward?
Oh, well, I think if you were to, it depends on how you value next season. If you're trying to be a playoff team next season and you're Montreal, you got to be really careful. If you're committed to the retooling or rebuilding, however you want to phrase it, then you're not worried about that. And I would tell you, even though Shane Wright is rated #1 for North American skaters, if you were able, let's just play a hypothetical here, and Montreal was able to get 1 and 2 and find a way to get Tommy Fitzgerald to move to Montreal, and you were to take Shane Wright and Juraj Slavkovsky, that speeds up the pace of your development as a Montreal Canadiens significantly. Or maybe you take Logan Cooley, or maybe you take Cutter Gauthier. But I would just tell you this. I don't know how much, because I've been really trying to stay low-key on this. I don't know how much people are talking behind the scenes about Juraj Slavkovsky, but if they're not, they're making a major mistake. He is amazingly gifted.
Oh, Marco, you can tell them how much they're talking about him.
Yeah, no, it's most definitely it's almost become toxic, I would say, on certain levels, because
the debate.
Juraj Slavkovsky is and it's constantly this Shane Wright versus Juraj Slavkovsky and measuring them and trying to establish where each of them are in their development and what their ceiling is. And I honestly feel the same way. I think, I have him ranked at #2. A lot of people have him ranked at #1, and some even have him, ranked later in the third or fourth rank. I'm of the ilk that, he is an impressive specimen. And a lot of the times when you look at a player of his ilk and you see the way that they play, especially at their international stage against men, the question simply is, what will that transition look like? When the players that he plays with are all around his size or play with the same physical edge, if not a more physical edge, because we've had situations where players looked absolutely dynamic internationally, like say a Jesse Puljujarvi, and then they come over to the NHL. It's not the same thing, but he's already proven that he can play well on small ice, because the international tournaments this year, for the first time, I believe, in the IHF's history, were mandated, despite being international tournaments on non-North American ices, were North American sized ices, and he dominated regardless. Where I kind of was paying attention, especially at the World Championships, was how he dealt, not against Great Britain, France, and the like, but how he dealt against nations with legit NHL players on them, like Finland that shut him down, or Canada that kind of kept him in check. The aptitudes are amazing, and I agree. He should be in the conversation, definitely for the top pick. But I guess I have the preference. I have always had the preference for the center, and that may be because I cheered for a team that was so deficient at that position for the 20 odd years that I followed them. But I guess for me, I honestly do feel like a lot of the issues with development and how COVID affected these younger players is really affecting this draft, in my opinion. And one of those things is the combination of how do you evaluate a player who's had uninterrupted hockey like a Slavkovsky versus someone who had no season last year like a Shane Wright. And so there's so much in that conversation. There's so much in the way that it is being that it could be developed and it's not. And I feel like just pitting one kid versus another right now isn't doing any favors to either of them.
Well, you got another thing that's interesting in this draft too, man, and that is what's going to happen with the Russian players. Are we going back to the freeze out like the 1980s into the early 90s? Are we going to be in a situation where, we're seeing a major resurgence in Slovak and Czech hockey? Is that going to become more apparent? So it's really an interesting time for this draft. But getting back to what Marco talked about, Jimmy, with Slavkovsky, I spent, a pretty significant amount of time on the road scouting this year. And I don't think it was even close in terms of who was the most dynamic player this season. And Slavkovsky was. It doesn't mean that Shane Wright's not really good, because he is. And I watched Kingston play a ton. Ottawa Senators, one of their top prospects was a goaltender. For Kingston. So I've watched them a ton. It's going to be interesting. Not a lot of talk about Joachim Kemmel, not a lot of talk about Jonathan Lekkerimäki. Two players I've seen a lot, not a lot of talk about Liam Ogren, who I've watched a ton. So, I mean, there are a lot of guys, just going off the top of my head, that I haven't heard too much talk about, and I can tell you they're very, very good players.
Jared, go ahead, Marco.
In fact, the Montreal Canadiens took Lekkerimäki out for dinner. And there's been a lot of discussion that if they do get back into the top 10, it is not, in fact, to get Slavkovsky, but in fact, to try to find some way to get him.
He's an explosive offensive player. He's got an amazing release. He's a guy that really attacks with pace from the blue line in. He's not intimidated playing against bigger people. He's not an overly large guy. They say he's 5'10". I'm not sure about that. They say he's 170 pounds. I'm not sure about that either. I watched he and Liam Ogren play together for Djurgården, both at the junior level and also with the older team. And I know their coach at the beginning of the year, Barry Smith, before Barry was relieved of his duties, and he can't say enough good things about both those guys. But the thing about Lekkerimäki is his release is NHL ready. I mean, he shoots a puck like an NHL player right now.
Absolutely.
Marco, and I want you to actually do this. It's funny you brought that up here, because Marco wrote a story yesterday just about some of those options that could be there other than the obvious ones in the top 10. And you already mentioned some of them. Marco, why don't you shoot a couple of these names and let's get, Pierre's scouting report.
Yeah, well, I mean, Lekkerimäki is probably one of the best. Is probably the best pure shooter in my opinion, and you could maybe make the argument for Kemmel as well and Slavkovsky, but I just find the mechanics better on a guy like Lekkerimäki. One of the other guys that we were looking at was the U.S. National Development Team's Frank Nazar, who is up and down on most rankings, but really one of the brighter spots for the U.S. National Development Program. Especially when I spoke to Adam Nightingale before he left, he couldn't say enough good things. After Logan Cooley, all the time he had was for Frank Nazar.
Yeah, no, Frank's a pure scorer. There's no question about it. He plays with a lot of pace. He's not overly large again. He's kind of short and squatty, but he can score. I mean, he's not as small as Cole Caulfield, and I don't know if he has as good a release as Cole Caulfield. But there's some similarities there in terms of the numbers. I mean, he's put up pretty dynamic scoring numbers. The one thing I'd say about him is work habits are impeccable, which I think a lot of people look for. And coachability is there as well. And that's why I think Adam Nightingale, who's going to be the next coach at Michigan State, probably was full of praise for him, because he is a very coachable player.
And that's where Nazar is going next year. So it makes a ton of sense as well. There was also, there's a few options. One of them, and this is a player we had last year this time, like shoemarked for the top 5, and slowly but surely kind of found his way sliding completely out. And that's someone like Brad Lambert.
Yeah, boy, oh boy, he's a tricky one. I watched Brad play a significant amount over obviously the World Juniors and international events, but I saw him play over in Finland this year as well. Skating is elite. I think character is good. Had a great start to this World Junior before obviously it got shut down. He moved around a lot, and I think that's something that kind of set him back. You know, he was in Jyväskylä. He played in IFK. He's been with Lahti. So he's played with a bunch of different teams, and I think that's kind of something that set him back a little bit. But that being said, the numbers were not overwhelming when he was playing in Jyväskylä last year. And I think it's something that people are kind of looking at. And he did not have very good numbers this year offensively when he was playing in the men's league, especially when you compare it to some of the other players, especially Joakim Kemmel, who was his teammate at one point with Jyväskylä.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, the one thing that a lot of us looked at when it came to measuring both of them is that the moment Kemmel's top 6 minutes went away, so did his production. Yeah. And Lambert always, like, he would go to a new team, start in the top 6, kind of produce, slowly find himself in the bottom 6, no longer produce, change team. And that happened 3 times in 2 years. And I guess that's the problem there. But his contract, you know, we're talking about draft and projection and having control over a player that you pick. His contract is up in Finland, allowing whoever drafts him to either send him to the Saskatoon Blades where his rights are owned, or send him directly to the American Hockey League should they feel, you know, he's played enough pro, maybe he could just, you know, fast track to the AHL. Would that, in your opinion, affect potentially the trajectory of where he would be ranked, allowing the team a little bit more control?
Yeah, I don't think that player's ready to play in the American Hockey League right now. Not enough people watch the American Hockey League. It is a really good league. You know,
we've been watching more lately with the Laval run, Pierre. So.
Yeah, the team that I spent a lot of time around this year, Belleville Senators, made the playoffs for the first time in the last 5 years. And we had players there that are going to be, you know, very, very good players in the NHL. And that was a team that got eliminated in the first round by Rochester in 2 overtime games. And I'm just telling you, the caliber of play was outstanding. The caliber of coaching in the American Hockey League is really good. This is not a knock on Brad Lambert, a player that I like a lot, but I just don't see him being ready. I think, if anything, to Marco's point, I could see him going to the Western Hockey League and maybe going to Saskatoon rather than just, you know, going to the American Hockey League. I can't see a lot of people wanting to fast track him there because for him to be really taking the next developmental step, he's got to play top 6 minutes. And in major junior, he's got to be a top 3 guy, even if he's going to take that next step.
Yeah.
And I mean, the Lamberts are famous in that neck of the woods, so might as well just go back.
Yeah. Pierre, I'm wondering, you know, in terms of, it just make me think, we're talking about some of these kids who are kind of going up and down, or a guy you guys mentioned that fell out of last draft and is now here again. It's how much is COVID and what the scouts went through, what the players went through, how much is that still having ramifications on rankings, on scouting reports, or are we starting to finally break through? I'm not going to use the word normal because I don't think we'll ever have a real normal again, but are we starting to get to some sort of normalcy again?
That is such a great question because it's, and what I would tell you is this. I think COVID's still having an effect on the draft. I think COVID's still having an effect on the way players are being signed out of college. I'll give you an example. You know, there are players that are 24 and 25 still playing college hockey, some of them 26. So that's affecting, you know, free agents and guys leaving, and some guys, even guys leaving earlier because older players are playing. And so that's affecting American Hockey League rosters. It's still reverberating. You know, I sat in the scouting meetings in Ottawa last year and was really impressed by the due diligence being done by the amateur scouts. And the one thing that, you know, became really apparent was just checking up to see which kids had COVID and which didn't. And so, COVID has played a significant role. And I can tell you, the 2020 draft, since 2003, the 2020 draft, player pool-wise, was the deepest draft we've had since 2003. Not even close, the deepest. And a lot of those kids never got drafted that should have been drafted. You can go look at the Central Scouting rankings and look at how many kids from Central Scouting rankings never got drafted. And part of it was because the North American kids weren't playing hockey, and the European kids were. And so there were a lot of European kids that were drafted in that draft from round 4 through 7 that never would have been drafted had the North American kids been playing. And so that's something that still had an effect, because a lot of those kids from the 2020 draft now, they're becoming overagers for junior this year, or they're becoming, first or second year players in college. And so they're not being drafted, and they're all of a sudden part of a free agent pool. So that just shows you how COVID has affected a lot of things.
Marco?
Well, you've seen it. You saw it this training camp when Montreal was able to sign defenseman Arbor Jacki, who was a major component to the Hamilton Bulldogs OHL championships that they just won this time around. Because...
Hey, Marco, he's a nasty piece of business, that kid. He's
I know, man.
Son of a gun.
Nice.
How many times has he been suspended this year? Like, geez.
I don't know the number on suspension, but I'll tell you one thing. I watched him play American Hockey League exhibition games. That guy is a tough son of a gun.
Nice.
Yeah, no, it's exactly the kind of player that I'm talking about, where you have these situations, and especially the OHL. I spoke to a few coaches in the OHL as I was doing my background on player interviews for this draft, and a lot of them spoke to the wealth of talent, but the impediment on their development. Like, there's only so much renting of ice and solo skating that they could have done in that lost year.
Yeah.
And you really saw it in the OHL. The first 2 months was some sloppy hockey, and it would almost look like OJHL style hockey. Whereas, you fast forward to January, February, March, and all of a sudden their legs start to pick up, and you start seeing some of these guys really start picking up, like Pavel Mintyukov's game really kind of going up the next level. You have Luca Del Bel Blues, Owen Beck, all these guys that weren't ranked in the first round. All of a sudden, boom, are all ranking in the first round by the midpoint, because they were able to kind of take their games up a notch. So
yeah,
it's crazy.
Well, yeah, no, we agree 100%. I couldn't agree with you more. That's why I said, yeah, COVID's still playing a significant role in what's going on here. There's no question.
You, Pierre, you did so much traveling, I know, and I remember, texting with you and talking with you throughout the year, and how excited you were to be back on the road doing this in person, as opposed to like so many others watching on video. Were there more, as the year went on, were there more scouts on the road in person, or is it still a strong video presence instead of in person?
No, it was mostly in person. I didn't see too many teams that weren't well represented. A lot of the different events I went to. The only one that obviously was, a bit of a curveball was the World Junior being ended the way it was. But no, most of the events were really well attended, and I think that will help with a lot of the decision making. I think the last 2 drafts, there have been some flawed decisions made by a lot of different teams, just because a lot of the scouting was done by a video rather than boots on the ground. And that's a really dangerous game to play. It really is. And I think a lot of the management people know that. And I can tell you, the chief scouts, and I know a lot of them in the league, that they're so happy to be back on the road watching everyday games.
Well, and it's interesting, right, Pierre, because I think we had this conversation in the past before COVID hit. We saw a lot of teams, whether it was to cut back on, travel and money or what have you, a lot of teams were starting to depend on video more than sending guys out. From the outside, you know better than me, it just appears maybe this taught them the lesson. Maybe they said, hey, no, you can't go that way. There's nothing that can replace in-person scouting. There's nothing that can replace meeting these kids in person and having a conversation with them.
Well, it got me ostracized by a lot of people, but I've been really strong on that for a long time.
You lose him?
You're cutting it out.
Sorry, but no, you've got to be able to see the players in their environment, and part of it is not just games; it's practices too. And the very best scouts are guys that do this 24/7. They're not just, going to games. They're doing it 24/7.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, because I did it for a long time, it's really an important part of the business to know everything about every single player in the draft. And if you don't as an organization, then you're not doing your job.
Well, listen, I think we got time for 1 or 2 more here, Pierre. I know you got to go. I just want to talk draft related, but more on the pro side, guys that are already there. As I was telling you off the air, I was talking to an NHL executive yesterday, He's saying, look, Murph, it's been quiet. There's some feelers out there, but I think it's going to pick up within the next couple of days and be that way as we head into the draft in Montreal. What's been your take so far in terms of chatter around the league? Is it picking up? Is he right? I mean, we did see that trade happen right after I spoke to him. So I'm just wondering what the vibe is you're getting.
I think anytime you head into a draft, and this will be the first time in a while that we have everybody at the same facility.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that makes a difference. So I think that's important. But I do think that we're going to see a lot more movement than maybe what we've seen in the past, not just with the draft, but with free agency too. And I think I don't know if it was Marco or Jimmy that was making the point, but, the cap's relatively flat. So some teams need to make moves to get more cap space. Others need to make moves because they need to get to the floor. So it's going to be interesting to watch. But no, I would expect you're going to see a lot of movement, especially once people start to get to Montreal.
Marco, one more?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wanted to circle back to the conversation because I know that this is the one question the listeners really want to go on. You spoke about who is the most, let's say, dynamic this season when you were looking at prospects, and then we're kind of projecting because Kent Hughes also said like he's not looking for the player that's the best right now. He's looking for the player that's going to be the best in 5 years.
Yep.
What are the pros and cons when looking at the conversation of number one right now between a guy like Shane Wright and Yuri Slafkovsky, and what do you project either of them to be realistically with obviously within a frame of give or take?
Well, Slafkovsky's a tremendous playmaking winger. I've watched him score goals, but I've also watched him make phenomenal plays with the puck. And he wants the puck on his stick. He demands the puck. Shane Wright is more of a complete player. He's probably more reliable in his own zone than Slafkovsky is. I think, depending on how you view the position, the center iceman is amazingly valuable, especially when they can play all three zones like Wright can. I think Wright's better days are ahead of him. I think Slafkovsky's got some finishing that has to happen with him in terms of development, just like Shane does. But no, I think there's very few guys in this draft that are going to be ready to play in the NHL in the next 2 years. They're very few, very, very few.
Interesting. Well, Pierre, thanks for taking the time, my friend. Always a pleasure to talk to you, and I hope we bump into each other in Montreal.
We will for sure. Nice visiting with you. Marco, take care of yourself. Take care, everybody. Enjoy the draft and enjoy the rest of the Stanley Cup final.
All right.
Thank you, Pierre.
Pierre McGuire joining us here on the Montreal Hockey Now podcast. I'm Jimmy Murphy. He's Marco D'Amico. Marco, one final word before we close her up here.
Yeah, this is going to do nothing to ease the fires that is the debate between Slafkovsky and Wright.
Yeah, I don't think that debate will be eased until the actual draft, and one of them is taken number one and one is taken number two. So we'll see what happens. But always a pleasure, my friend. We will talk soon, and thank you to our listeners, and look forward to everyone up. I hope we can bump into some of you people up in Montreal. We're trying to organize something right now with McLean's Pub like we've done in the past, and so whether we do an event there or not, we will be at that pub enjoying some adult beverages and talking some hockey. So come on by and say hello. Until then, I'm Jimmy Murphy. He's Marco D'Amico. We'll talk to you next week.